This isn't a war zone, so it is not everyone's like, wow, these prices, these are so amazing. Yeah, well, this was the kind of property that you put a dumpster in front of to clean out, and all the neighbors fill your dumpster before you get there. So, it was a great place.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. I've got another great guest with me today, Dave Pere. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, brother. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, looking forward to chopping it up with you. Dave is a financially free Marine Corps veteran who devotes his free time to helping service members and veterans learn how to build wealth through real estate investing, entrepreneurship, and personal finance. Dave, again, really appreciate you being here with us today. Maybe you can kind of give our listening audience a little bit more information on kind of your background, your story, your journey, what you're focused on today, et cetera.
Boy, I'm glad I updated that. I for the longest time, I had like 3 different bio options, and they were all just like, 5-paragraph essays. And not only that, but I hadn't updated them in years, so they were like all wrong. And I would have a host read it, and I'd be like, I should probably fix that. Like, I'm listening to stuff that's not accurate at all anymore. Like, oh yeah. So the simple one's good, but I guess you're right. It doesn't really tell anyone anything about me. And highlights, right? I joined the Marine Corps in 2008 because I was growing up in Little Rock, Arkansas. I wanted to travel the world, have some adventure, and I didn't have money for school. So what better way to leave the state and let Uncle Sam send you wherever he wants? I did that for 13 years because I figured out that even after having Uncle Sam be able to pay for college, I still didn't really want to go. And I still liked traveling. And so I got sent all over the place for a while. I went to, Afghanistan and probably 12 other countries while I was in, and then got stationed some pretty cool spots. And then from there, I in 2015, I was broke. I was stuck on recruiting duty, and I was working just crazy hours. I tell people I was averaging 80 hours a week, and they always tell me I'm full of crap. And then I'm like, all right, fine, go sign up for recruiting duty and call me in 3 years. But yeah, I got done. I got halfway through that, and someone handed me the book Rich Dad Poor Dad right around when I was thinking, man, I really don't like this. What if I just left the military? And I realized I would have had to leave the military and go take another W-2 or some other job. And so Rich Dad Poor Dad was basically the window open to what's possible. And then from there, I bought a duplex, and kind of the rest is history, right? 5.5 years later, I was a millionaire on equity, which is super spendable. And then, but it sounds cool. Everybody's like, wow, millionaire. You're like, yeah, it's equity. I can't do anything with it. I'm still broke, but it's cool. But more importantly, I was financially free, right? I was able to leave the military. I started in December of 2015. I left the military in October of 2021. So just under 6 years later, and I've never had to work again since. So I accomplished what I needed to accomplish. And I say never had to work again, right? Like, that's a lie. I do, but it's on whatever I want. So I don't really consider it work.
Yeah, amen to that. And obviously, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. And second to that, thanks for obviously sharing kind of what your story looked like there. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about the duplex that started it all. Okay. Can you walk us through that first real estate deal you did? I think it was a duplex in Missouri, how that, experience really fueled your passion for investing.
Yeah, it was great. It was, I probably looked at 6, 7, 8 properties in 2015. Obviously anything you bought that you didn't tank in, by just ruining the deal yourself, basically turned to gold and makes you look like a really smart investor. I wish I'd bought a whole lot more back then. I'd look way more intelligent. And I used an FHA loan because my lender didn't understand the VA loan and talked me out of it with some misconceptions. He told me you could only use it one time and it'd be a waste to use it on that property. And he was wrong about all that. But I used an FHA, so 3.5% down. That thing was this was, Midwest Missouri in 2015. So I paid 79.9, so just under 80 grand. So uh, all in, I think with closing cost fees and a little bit of linoleum or LVP I put into the place, I might have been at like $4,500 all into this house. I moved in. It was a simple little, I was paying 550 a month to live in a 2-1 apartment, and this thing cost me 585 a month, but I had a tenant paying 475, so I was out 110 bucks a month to live in it, plus the same utilities I'd been paying anyway. And then when I moved out, I was gonna stay out on recruiting duty, and they denied it because apparently I was really good at it, but there was like a minimum rank threshold to become a career recruiter. So while I won an award for being the recruiter of the year in 9 states or the station commander of the year, I was simultaneously not allowed to stay because I was not the next rank, which is really funny to me because I'm like, you just gave me an award for being the best in the state. And they're like, yeah, like, but okay, all right, well, I'll go back and like, that's fine. Yeah, keep someone else. It's pretty funny. But so I got orders to Hawaii, which arguably the greatest place they could have sent me from recruiting duty. It was really nice. I enjoyed the beach. And once I moved out, it was cash flowing. Yeah, it was nothing crazy. It was like 200 bucks a month, but it was enough for me to go, this actually works. And then from there, the rest is history. It was a slow roll at first because I didn't, 200 bucks a month doesn't go very far towards the down payment, and neither does a military salary with a family. But a year and a half later, we bought a 10 unit, and then it was on from there. So
Yeah, let's unpack that 10 unit a little bit more now. So you obviously kind of cut your teeth,
yeah,
with the duplex that started it all, and then that was kind of your gateway, into getting into a large, or a small multi. I know that you use creative financing. I know that you kind of, combined, some bank financing with seller financing. I believe even you leveraged your HELOC. What advice would you have for really others looking to use creative financing to build either their small single family home rental portfolio or move into the small multi space?
yeah, you did your homework. I like it. That was actually, that 10 unit is probably my favorite deal I've ever done. I've done some pretty cool stuff, but as far as just flat out returns, that thing was pretty sick. So yeah, I wrote like 112 letters by hand on a legal pad to duplex owners on a 24-hour duty post when I was in the military. I mean, hand cramps galore, but just writing the same thing out all night, and sent them out. I got a couple responses. None of them were amazing. Now that I look back, I should have bought every single one of them because, again, that was 2017, so they would have all turned to gold. And this one guy sends me a letter. He's like, I'm not interested in selling you a duplex, but I've got a 10 unit if you want it. And he wanted 250. I got him down to 240. This is in a war zone, so it is not everyone's like, wow, these prices, these are so amazing. Yeah, well, this was the kind of property that you put a dumpster in front of to clean out, and all the neighbors fill your dumpster before you get there. So, it was a great place. And he wanted 250. We got him down to 240. In the inspections, we came up with, $20,000-$30,000 worth of stuff. And rather than negotiating for him to do it or for me to do it or anything, I just asked him to take it off the price. Hindsight, probably not the way I would do it going forward. I probably would have just asked for the credit, or had him do it, whatever. But that worked. He took it off the price. And the interesting thing is the bank missed that memo. So what happened is the bank was showing up with a check for a 240 purchase, and basically they ended up, instead of being 80% down, they were like 85 and a little bit of change. And they basically called me on closing day and they were like, well, you can either delay a week while we redo all the paperwork, or you can just go back to the bank and get a smaller check. And I was like, done. I will definitely put less down on this if you force me to. And I negotiated. The seller was going to give me a 10%. He was going to carry 10% for 5 years at 10% interest. And then I was out of pocket. I think it came out to like $10,990 and some pennies. And I wrote the check from the HELOC that we had on my now ex-wife's primary at the time that she had when we got married. And that was, so I was basically into it for, I guess, zero if you count the equity spend of the HELOC, but 11 grand. And I bought it for 212.5. And 4 years to the day later, I sold it at 340. And I would say it averaged about 750 a month in cash flow over the time we owned it. So all in, I think I netted right around 193 when I sold it. And it was, subtract the 11, but I mean, it's like a 16, 17x return in 4 years. And, it was a war zone, but I also had a property manager dealing with the war zone. So I had to do very little. It had a lot of headaches. It had a lot of issues. It was a lot of, I have received to date, I believe, more phone calls on that single property from my property manager with bad news than on all the rest of my real estate combined. But I didn't have to do anything but field the phone calls, really. Um, well, there was one time that I had to go to the property to, well, I say deal with a tenant. I basically, this tenant just kept giving my property managers they're all, well, at the time most of their employees were females, and some of them are, a little bit more rugged than others, but most of them are not exactly intimidating. They're cute little blondes or whatever. And so I got asked basically to go straighten this guy out once. And so that was the one time I had to visit the property to actually help them. And, it's Missouri. So I think the PC way to say this, depending on where your listeners are calling in from, is I executed my Second Amendment rights in a very visual, on display, look at me way. And I'm a somewhat intimidating human when it comes to just being built like Jason Kelsey, but smaller. And now that I have the beard, I get told I look like him all the time. So, but anyway, yeah, I basically stood next to this guy with a 12 gauge slung across my back and told him, hey, my property manager said they're having issues with you. I'd really like it if I never got a phone call again. And then he paid rent forever. So it was that kind of property, but it was an incredible return. And my first foray into, creative financing and HELOCs and leveraging all that stuff. And it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that does sound like a good journey there. And yeah, I mean, sometimes we have to flex our muscles, right, so to speak. So makes total sense to me. I know that one of the books that you read kind of early on in your journey, was a book that many of our listeners have read before, maybe multiple times, and that's Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I know that was really a turning point for you, as it has been for a lot of others. What mindset shifts or habits were critical in your journey to finding financial independence? And I say that because everybody, it seems like, wants to get there, but oftentimes people aren't willing to put in the reps, to grind it out, to maybe have that mindset shift that's necessary in order for them to get on that path to financial freedom or financial independence.
Yeah, it's interesting. Real estate or investing is almost the opposite of, like, say, fitness and working out. And I've never even thought of using this acronym before, or this analogy before. So if it lands well, I'm going to use this more often. But people get into, they get into weightlifting, we'll call it, or running, or whatever that is. We'll call it weightlifting, and they have massive gains. It is so easy. If you've never lifted weights, if you have a good diet and a good workout plan and you're consistent, you'll see incredible gains that first 6 months to a year. And then over time they taper. And it's like you have this like inverse of compound where it's like you just like people get into fitness and they get hooked, and then like a year, 2, 3 down the road, it becomes more monotonous and less results and less. It's You're still hooked, but it's like you have to physically be like, okay, what do I have to change in order to get anything out of this? Whereas investing is like the exact opposite. It's like you buy that first property, it makes you $100, $200 a month. Well, that doesn't change anybody's life. And that second property doesn't change anybody's life. And that third one probably doesn't change anybody's life. And then if you just keep slogging away, a few years down the road, you're like, holy crap, I'm making $5,000 a month from these rentals. Now, instead of like that first property, it took me a year and a half to save up to buy that second property. And even then I had to use a HELOC for all of it, but I paid most of it back. Took me a year from second property to third. It took me 6 months. And then there was a time 2 years after that where we were buying 4 deals a month, or transacting 4 deals, some wholesale, some flip, some burr, whatever, any hodgepodge amount. But I mean, like there was a week, like the week before Christmas in 2021, that I locked 7 deals under contract and was like, now what? And so things just change dramatically. but it's like the exact opposite. It's like you have to be willing to deal with, like, you're not going to see like the get rich quick and sexy stories. They do happen, but not very common. And honestly, I joke with friends. I'm like, the guy who flips his first house and makes six figures is the guy who's going to lose his shirt on the second house
That's right.
because he gets over his britches. It's not meant to be sexy on day one. It's like investing in real estate flat out. Anyone who's been doing this long enough, it's pretty boring, and that's why it works. I think it's that barrier to entry. So anyway, so I guess the mindset for me was just understanding, like, when Robert talks about that book, by the way, it is nothing other than a really well told way to make a boring subject entertaining enough that people pay attention. And all it really did, like, by the end of it, I'm like, if I just buy one and then another and then another and then another, eventually these things will buy them, and then I don't have to do anything, and it just self-licking ice cream cone. That's great. um it was just a simple concept broken out in a way that made it sound fun, because the reality is, like, if it doesn't, like, finance is not sexy at all. People make it look that way when they show you what they can buy, but the actual, like, yeah, it's just boring. So it's like, how do you get past that initial year or two of, like, dragging through the mud, dealing with tenants, hating everything, to see the other side? That's all that really stands between somebody who succeeds and doesn't.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I think that sometimes people have a bit of a challenge to kind of take a risk on themselves. And that may be a lack of confidence, right? And maybe a mental mindset that they need to, kind of flex a little bit, right? Or they just need to find a way to rip that band-aid off and, go both hands and both feet, into whatever that activity is. But really appreciate, you kind of sharing your perspective there.
I'm Zach Haptonstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investor. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, and go to our website and set up a call with our team.
Because most of the investors that I believe that you serve have are either former service members or veterans. What's kind of maybe some of the more common mistakes that you see service members and veterans, making, and how does your platform, help them to avoid those pitfalls?
Well, I think the main way the platform helps them avoid those is that I'm the relatable asshole who did all of them. I mean, you name it, right? I always joke. I'm like, man, I spent that first 7 years in the Marine Corps making memories and blowing money, and people are like, oh yeah, well, whatever. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I did everything, from the cars you shouldn't buy to the motorcycles you shouldn't buy to the tattoos you don't need and the alcohol you're probably too young to be drinking anyway, to all the eating out and taking chicks on dates and just like partying with. I mean, I blew money. I don't even know where it went. When you go to Japan, you get paid a little extra for living in Japan. I was stationed there for 2 years, not a dollar to show for it. I don't know where that extra money went. Same with deployments. I got back from Afghanistan. I had a brand new Harley, a rifle that's a way better shot than I have any range in town to use it on, and a truck that was 30 years old, and no money left after that. It's just funny, but I'm just relatable in that way. I think the vehicle is probably the number one mistake. It's funny, when you join the military, you basically have financial freedom, like day one. It's like, if you had debt before, with the Service Member Civil Relief Act, the SCRA, they cut it to 6%, federally mandated, whatever. So if you have a credit card, they cut it to 6%. Any pre-existing debt, 6% is the cap. So that helps anybody out dramatically. And then you've got your food paid for, your housing paid for, your medical, your dental, your life insurance. You don't need a car because you can just walk to work or like carpool with a buddy. You live in the barracks. Like, they pay for everything if you just let them. And then it's like, all you really have to do from there is not go into debt and dig yourself a hole. And that's exactly what we do. We go and we buy all the stupid toys, the big TV, the PS5, and the Challenger at 25% interest. And then we wonder, what happened. And so all I'm trying to really do is get in front of those guys and be like, hey, before you do all that, what if we put like a little bit in your 401k and save, like get you into like a duplex where you can live for free, and now if you blow that money, like just save what you would have been paying on rent, and that alone will set you up for success. But it's just that battle of trying to get in somebody's head and be like, look, man, I get it. The Charger's cool. I'm not a fan, but they're cool. Um, the Porsche I'm going to buy in 2025 is way cooler, and I didn't buy it because I bought the Charger. I bought it because I didn't buy the Charger. Like I invested that money, and I actually, it's funny because when I got into real estate, I sold my Harley. I had a Honda S2000 that I decked out, and I had another vehicle, and I had a Ford Escort that I was driving. And those three properties bought me a duplex that I rolled into another duplex that I rolled into a 40-unit hotel. And when we sell that 40-unit hotel, hopefully in 25, that'll buy my Porsche, Turbo S or GT3 RS. That's a, couple $100,000 car. That's like a dream car. It will actually buy it. I'm not going to do the lease and guru thing, but
Yeah. So you're like the what would you say, the Dave Ramsey version, the military Dave Ramsey version, right?
just not debt averse.
Yes, but I do appreciate that you highlight, that there is a different way that people can go about it, right? You can go out and you can buy the thing, right? Or you can invest in something and have the cash flow from the something pay for what you want, right?
Exactly.
It's a very different way to think about it. And, we've kind of adopted, a very similar, methodology in our home as well. Whereas if I need to go get, that new Ford Expedition Platinum, right? Rather than throwing $100,000 into the Platinum, right? Invest it in something that produces consistent cash flow of, I don't know, 5 to 7 to 8% annually, and then use the cash flow from the investment to pay for the payment on the vehicle, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely does.
Yeah. So great. So let's talk. I want to talk a little bit more about your book. I believe your book is called The No BS Guide to Military Life. There it is.
Yep, there it is.
I'm also a fellow author. I published a book called The Fundamental Investor, and I'm sure there's some similar
beautiful
commonalities between the two books. But, what specifically inspired you to write, your book, and what are the top key takeaways that you hope that readers, especially service members, gain from it?
Really, I think it's a couple things, but I think part of it is that I failed an English class in high school, and I wanted like the ultimate middle finger to everyone who told you couldn't succeed in life is to then be a published author. I don't know how accurate that is because the bar to being an author these days is not quite as high as it once was. But I went through the real, like 3 different editors, the whole thing. But I also wanted like a single place that I could point people towards and say, look, this is everything I wish I'd known the day I joined the military. If you just like, it's a chronological kind of walkthrough of what you're going to run into. And it's like, if you just follow along this stuff, at least it'll help you avoid the major pitfalls. And if I can just steer you towards, avoiding a couple pitfalls and like one decent move, you'll be years ahead of where I was 2 enlistments in. And so, it's chronological. The very first thing we talk about is your 401k, because you can set that up at boot camp. It's like, hey, if you set it up like this, you could just never touch it again and you'd be a lot better off than I was. And if they just do that part and then don't buy the car, they're probably better off than 80% of service members. And it's just, it's a really basic down. I mean, I wrote the book like I talk. It is understandable. There's humor in it. I literally, I joke because people are like, oh, I'm like, I get to say whatever I want and do whatever I want with my audience because, they're all service members and vets and they speak my language. Like one of my very best friends is a guy named Alex Felice, and he is just he's a big crap talker, but he's also like, he's the one guy that I can always count on to like poke me if I'm like saying one thing and doing another, or if I'm, getting out of shape again or whatever. Like he's the guy who's always there to put me back. And in the very back of the book, in the acknowledgments, I literally just wrote his name and was like, F you. And like, and my friends are like, what are you doing? I'm like, I got to publish a book. And in that book, I got to tell this guy like pound sand. It's in writing. So that's like the whole theme of the book is very, casual, fun, but informational about everything from, basic finance, real estate investing, VA loans go really heavy into, and then a lot of it talks about like deciding when to leave the military, whether or not to go reserves or stay active duty, or just get out completely, and the transition and the medical stuff and some of the issues that you're going to come up with. If I ever do, update it, that's probably where I'll spend more time, is like that transition out is a lot harder than people think. Even if you're financially set up, there's a lot of mental stuff that you got to deal with. So
Yeah.
I'll probably rewrite some of that to dive into it, but yeah.
Well, now that you got edition number 1 complete, we'll be looking for edition number 2. And just for my listening audience that didn't catch this, the name of Dave's book is called The No BS Guide to Military Life. So certainly go check that book out. Dave, what would maybe be 1 or 2 other ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, the absolute best one is if you just go to thebestpodcastguest.com. I've got a free PDF download of the book and all my social media platforms there.
That's great. Well, we'll go ahead and put that link in the show notes for the episode. And Dave, I really appreciated you joining the show today and providing such tremendous value.
I appreciate you having me on, brother.
Absolutely. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.